So hit start recording, start streaming. We are live. Get your ducks in order. We are here tonight, for another episode of Not Pretty But Wonderful, Designers in Conversation. Who are you?
Hey everyone, I'm Liam. Most of you probably know me better as Sandy Pug Games.
So this is it's actually the first time Liam and I are actually speaking. I've seen photos of you, but since your avatar is not your face, I always kind of forget what you look like. So this is very interesting for me.
Yeah, it's intentional. I want to throw everyone off the trail.
So I primarily know you through your, I'm gonna say, work in proving that co-ops can work. I think in my mind, there's kind of a distinct line where you come onto the scene, and I'm aware of you, and that is when the discussion around creator-owned co-ops, right? That's what they are. Becomes something that people take seriously and something that is possible, right?
There was definitely a moment where suddenly everybody was talking about it as an idea, and people were trying it.
Yeah, and my awareness of you starts around that point. And then obviously we're Twitter mutuals, so I see your shit all the time, and you have done some very interesting projects. We can talk about those in specifics. But yeah, I mean, just broadly, when did you get involved with tabletop games? When did you get involved as a player? When did you get involved as a kind of working professional?
Yeah. So as a player, so where I grew up, it's a rough part of the world, and so the idea of being a nerd was, I played video games, and that was enough in that period of time that that I was the target of derision and mocking, so being more nerdy than video games that wasn't really an option for me. So I didn't stop playing role-playing games until I was past 16, I guess, maybe 15, something like that.
Okay.
So I didn't have a young experience with tabletop RPGs. I was becoming an adolescent when I got over myself. Or a young adult rather. And I played D&D for a little bit and didn't ever use any of the rules. I knew that a D20 was involved in kind of an abstract sense, but
sure.
have you seen those books?
Oh yeah.
You're not gonna read those. Are you kidding me? So I didn't play. I didn't know the rules to D&D 3.5. What's worse is we made one of the guys in the group that I was playing. We made him buy them because he was from the rich family. He always had money. So we made him buy all the books, and I kept them, and I didn't even read any of the fucking things. We didn't even need them. We needed dice, and we could have been having the exact same experience of me just kind of arbitrarily saying, "Yeah, that happens."
Just make pretend with some kind of false boundaries on how shit works.
Right, and I think everyone in the group assumed I knew how the rules worked, so it was they were playing a game, I was doing whatever, and it was a mess.
Sure.
Anyway, so that was my first group, and then I played All Flesh Must Be Eaten.
Wow. Yeah, zombie game. Piece of shit, but
it was a different game than D&D,
sure.
and the experience of playing something that wasn't D&D was that was enough to change things up.
It's a really interesting. It's an interesting second game.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know anybody who ever talks about it. I don't think it ever gets any
It's broadly forgotten.
I think. It's millions of other games, right? Thousands of games that are out there. There was that explosion of the D20 rule books, and before that there was just explosions of AD&D ripoffs, and there's millions of these. Whenever you go to a convention, if you go to one of those bookstores, there's 4 million tabletop RPGs that you've never heard of.
Any sufficiently large hobby store just has a back catalog of shit that nobody's seen in 20 years.
Right.
Because they just can't move it.
Right. So yeah, All Flesh Must Be Eaten, which like for me at the time was so much better than D&D that I would like hack that to run all kinds of silliness.
Okay.
Yeah, so like I'd gotten to the point where I was aware that other role-playing games existed, but
Hmm.
not to the point where I thought maybe I should look for one to do the thing that I want. It
Sure.
just there's one more. And then progressed through a variety of other games in pretty rapid succession after that. I didn't become a designer really. I did like the usual sort of eternal GM stuff where you're
Hmm.
always like goofing around with something, but I never really made something until I used to actually Sandy Hook Games used to be a board game design
Interesting.
sort of endeavor. When I first started years ago, the goal was it's the same Twitter account, like
Hmm.
same everything basically. I still have the a lot of the board game designs like up for download in a couple of places. Um, so it was supposed to be that, um, but making an the path to getting a board game published is significantly more difficult than getting
Yeah.
a role playing game out there. With a role playing game, even if I just put out something and like 5 people download it on itch.io, I've still kind of shared it with
Hmm.
someone, right? Like I've still got it out there. Maybe someone gave me $1 for it. If I want to make a board game real before Kickstarter was really an option,
Yeah.
that was like I made the board game and then I was like, right, now I need to get this to someone. And then I was like I guess I could email them. And like that was what I did for a little bit. Like I would email people and like I would try to meet them at conventions. The first time I went to Gen Con was trying to sell board games to people on the floor. Um and that sucked. That wasn't great. Like that never went anywhere. And like the games I made, I think I made some pretty cool games, but like you would never get any response from anybody. You had no way to kind of like build any kind of like communication with other people. Like there's no way to like talk to people in the same way that we do in the role playing game community. I can make a game about something and put it out there and then talk about the thing that it's about. And I can have people like make another game about that thing and we can kind of have a dialogue through that. And that
But
happens all the time. But
it's not the discourse in the way that we have in role playing games.
right. But like I couldn't it was it was wild.
Yeah.
And boring and bad and I didn't like it. So I stopped making I made like some Dungeon World cheats and I put them up
Okay.
and I forgot about them for like 2 or 3 years. They were up on Drive Through RPG for like 2 or 3 years and I didn't look at them once. But they hadn't been authorized.
Mm.
When I uploaded them, they were very bad cheats, by the way. You can still go and buy them now if anyone wants to see like some of the worst Dungeon World cheats that have ever been made. I leave them up because people still buy them. And I'll take your $1 though.
Yeah.
They're very nice like design sheets, you know. They're pretty. I made them pretty. Um, so I put them up, and Drive Through RPG won't publish your thing unless you have a cover for it, right?
Mhm.
And they wouldn't manually authorize them because I was a new person. They wouldn't manually authorize it. They sent me an email, said, "Hey, you need to have a cover image," and I was like, "Well, I don't have a cover image, and I don't know how to make art, so never mind." And so they just sat up there, and my account accumulated those publisher points that you get,
Mhm.
the like that take you spend like 4,000 of them or whatever it
Yeah.
takes you six
So
years to build them up and
just a quick explanation. This is a thing on drive-through.
yeah
When you are a product creator and you sell your things on their site, you get points which can be used for usually various forms of advertising, putting you up on the
right.
front page, things like that. Um,
The only one worth anything, by the way, to anyone listening is the daily deal. The rest
mhm.
of them don't do anything. They're just a waste of time. Save all of your points and run the daily deal once a year or so whenever you can. It's the rest of them are pointless.
Yeah.
Except emailing your customers. Those are great.
Sure.
So my account accumulated loads of these points, and I left it for like 2 or 3 years. And so when I came back, I had enough points to run daily deals. Like I ran like 4 of them in a row. I came back because I discovered the world of like free game art,
Sure.
which wasn't a thing that I was super aware of for a while, like the accessibility of it. And I just grabbed some free images and I slapped them some covers together and I put them online. And then I ran like 3 daily deals on these like 3 incredibly bad sheets that sold for like I made like 50 cents or something on each of them at the time with the daily deal. It was ridiculous. I like wasted 3 years of saving up those points. I like still hate myself for that to this day. Just recently, I ran a daily deal, and I'm gonna like pull back the curtain. I made $350 in one daily deal with Americana, just this month.
Yep.
Which was great because the world is on fire. So $350 extra goes a long way.
Great.
Mostly I just gave them to like artists for this project that we're doing, so people have money. So basically, I gave away like $950 worth of promo that's just gone. But that was the start of my tabletop career, and like from there, I made a couple more Dungeon World sheets, and then I made Mirror, which is an indie game, my first like proper thing, I think. And,
yeah. How do you make the jump from DW sheets, which like is cool, but it's basically just hacking, right?
Yeah, it's a different thing.
It's what any GM does, but like the slightly next level. It's designing it and putting it out. How do you make the jump from that to like Mirror?
I was like jealous. Y'all seemed really cool, and like all the cool people that I followed looked like they were doing like really cool stuff, and I was just like making cool things. Like I was just coming up with like JoJo stands and making sheets out of them, which is like
Sure.
I'm not ashamed of that. Those are some fun sheets. I got really good at doing Dungeon World sheets, and I recommend everyone go and buy them. Not least because I need money. But yeah, like I was making these sheets and I was fiddling around with it, and y'all seem to be having a lot of fun making games. Like it literally was being on Twitter and watching like the indie scene and friending a bunch of them and like following them and seeing all these like fun things that everyone's making. I was like, that looks really, really fun. I want to do that. And so like I sat down and I thought about what I wanted to make, and like I just started hacking some stuff together, and I made Mirror. And then like I don't know, from that point on, it's like all the games that I make are either like very detailed hacks of other systems or other existing games, because I'm really not that good at. I'm not that I don't feel like incredibly confident at coming up with like randomization mechanics and things like that. But I tend to be pretty good, and I tend to enjoy playing with existing systems and existing toolkits, which is why Powered by the Apocalypse like really appeals to me, and why I use like that and its derivatives quite often in my stuff. It's really easy to get your hands in the guts and like mess around with stuff with that thing.
I draw kind of a false dichotomy between what I think of as the creator as writer and the creator as editor. Like the iterative designer versus the like nothing new under the sun, right? Like it is rare for me to see something where I'm like, oh shit, that's new. But there is a school of design where it is like not just changing something to make something new out of something that exists. Even if you're doing that, you're mashing so many weird things together that it seems new. And then there's the editorial version. I am very much of the editorial school. I am much more comfortable taking something I'm familiar with and making something new out of it. It's actually interesting that you say that, because when I think of you and your body of work, I don't think of you as an editorial creator. And I'm not entirely sure why. So much of what I think about when I think about you is centered around kind of novel ideas. And I think that is kind of the space you occupy within the gestalt of the industry. Do you feel differently? Like where do you place yourself within the broader RPG space?
I don't think that like I view myself as like a mechanical innovator.
Sure.
Like I don't think that I think that I'm not like sort of speaking out of turn or anything when I say that. I don't really think that a lot of people who know me like are thinking about like the way how you play my games necessarily, like how the dice are rolled specifically. But I do think that like in the process of making games, like I think that like conceptually I tend to try to make games that have themes and ideas and like images that aren't common. be that through art direction or through like setting and general vibes. I try to look for like things that don't already exist in somewhere. Like Disposable Heroes is it's a powered by the apocalypse game. It does something a little different, but it is essentially a kind of like slightly advanced version of Dungeon World, or not advanced, like a focused version of Dungeon World with some like moves to handle the cards. But it is basically, I mean, it's a funnel game. In its, but
Sure. I
the
mean,
format is slightly different.
it's almost like Dungeon World by way of DCC.
Yeah, right, exactly. Which so they have like a shared DNA anyway.
They do, but it's also a novel mashup, and I think you're right. When I think of people who are like really fucking with the edge of mechanics, I don't think.
Sorry about that.
What I have no idea what just happened.
Oh, there was a beep.
Oh, that's fine. This is getting transcribed and edited. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
I don't think of you as someone who like is fucking around with the edge of mechanics, like really, really far out there in space. But I do think of the things that you produce as things that occupy empty spaces.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I take a lot of pride in, and that's something that like I do seek where I can.
Sure. I mean, the other thing that I think about when I think about you is I don't think of you in the kind of lone designer way, right? There are people out there who, when I think of them, it is their work. They stand alone. They might collaborate, like they might have somebody do layout, but I don't really think about that other person. Whereas when I think about you, I think about collectives, and again, that's the co-op thing. But one of the things that it introduces is the kind of logistical complications of moving from developer to publisher.
Yeah.
And kind of cat wrangler. What has that shift been like for you? Do you feel comfortable in this position of kind of holding groups together?
Yeah, I mean it's something that I like trained to do before before 2008. Like my degree was in like project management and like business lead and that sort of thing, and that's kind of been like before I got into creative work with any real seriousness, which is not a change that I regret even an ounce, by the way. I am much happier as an artist than I ever was as a business person. But before that, my main sort of ambition in life was to like lead teams and pull projects together and manage everything. And like, I'm not saying that I was particularly talented in that field, but like, I think it's a skill set that doesn't manifest all that often in our space.
It does
it's
not.
There are a handful of people in our space that I know are like competent project managers and people who have trained as it, or other people who've come into the scene from another background where they've had the experience and stuff. But it's few and far between, and like sort of by default, the amount of skill that I have kind of like, I don't know. I enjoy the work a lot, and it is not something that I find like as taxing as I think a lot of people might expect it is. I like, which feels weird to say. I had a conversation today with someone who was sort of saying, "Oh, you must have so much work on with all these projects you have running." And I'm like, "Well, I've watched 4 different episodes of an anime that I like today, and like, I had a nap. I feel like I'm working kind of hard, but I could also like I got some hours if you need something."
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a role that I enjoy. It's a role that I find myself kind of comfortable in. But like the transition has been interesting because the difficult part is for me like the social boundaries that exist when you go from one relationship to the other. Like the obvious thing is Kickstarter, right?
Sure.
Kickstarter is the way how like the vast majority of us are ever making any actual cash off of this silliness.
Yeah, I mean, there was an interview recently with Luke Crane and Anya, whose last name I'm forgetting, the now head of games of Kickstarter, and I think they said that something like 20% of the total industry output comes through them.
Yeah, easily.
It's massive.
Yeah, and we did that economic survey, the results of which like I still need to properly publish, but like the conclusions there were like, without Kickstarter, you have to be like some kind of fluke. Like there's a handful of outliners who are like pulling in enough money to make it without Kickstarter, but you know, the answers to the rest of their questions make them out to be some kind of like
Yeah.
strange superstar that we don't need to worry about what they're
Yeah.
up to.
Such a dramatic outlier that you're not going to pull anything useful from them.
Right. But here's the thing: if I want to do, when I, as a writer, as a creator, my like work is done pretty quick. Often a lot of my work is done before I even hit Kickstarter in my specific field as a writer and as a designer. And the way that I work is such that like by the time the Kickstarter hits, I have probably like 75% of my work done. And I can finish the rest pretty quickly. But in all of my projects, one of the things that I think that Sandy Pug Games does really well, and for a variety of reasons we do this well, but one thing I think we do well is we hit above our weight quite a lot in regards to like art or fun stuff around the game or something like that. Like
Sure.
there tends to be something about what we do that we manage to do a lot more with like with a relatively small amount of income or a small amount of money. We just go a little far. But a part of that is that we have lots of really cool people doing stuff for the projects, and their stuff takes a very long time, which is another reason that I think we're able to do a lot of cool stuff. Is that when I talk to artists, I say, "How long do you think you like? How long are we going to need? How long do you need an extra 6 months on top of that?" Like, people will wait for a Kickstarter, so there's like deadlines aren't usually a thing when you work with me. But what that you always ends up with is me sitting around for like 10 months doing very little besides like occasionally saying that looks good or that doesn't look good or whatever. The work is done, it just needs to be edited, and I have someone who will edit it for me, and once it's edited I know someone who's going to lay it out for me, and once it's laid out I know 2 to many artists who will like do the art for me, and
Sure.
that all takes the lion's share of the time to produce. And so it's frustrating, right? Like I sit around for like most of last year. I had these moments where I was really frustrated because I wanted to make more stuff. I wanted to make more cool ideas, but there's only so far that like just a typed up document gets you. Most people like, I mean, everybody here who will read this or has listened to this probably has at least has a itch.io account with like a couple of games that have 4 downloads on them. It's ridiculous. Kickstarter is the place that you go not just for the money but the marketing too. So even if hypothetically I have the cash to fund a game all by myself without Kickstarter funds, I'm not going to spend $2,000 on art for a game and then put it on itch.io and it gets 4 sales. That would be the last game I ever make. That would be it. I'd be like, okay, well, cool. Now I'm broke forever.
Yeah.
So you got to do Kickstarter. That's just how it is right now. But I can only do 1 Kickstarter at a time, really, or like maybe 2 if I push that social sort of expectation. Because people see Sandy Pug Games, they think 1 person. And like now people are going to get frustrated because their game isn't coming while I'm working on these other things. So the transitionary relationship really is like a solving of that problem for me, is trying to find a way that I can continue making content and making art and making stuff that I want, and assuring people, like, don't worry, your thing is still being made. It's a different team. And that's been kind of the figuring out how to make that work is something that I've been thinking about a lot recently. I would really like to just be making stuff all the time.
Sure.
I would just love to be constantly producing cool stuff. The fact that I'm limited by the fact that like it is very difficult to explain to people succinctly that like I'm not sort of sitting around doing nothing on their project. Their project is still ticking.
So
and I don't really have an answer.
No. That's totally. I don't either. Right?
Yeah, it's a problem that needs solving, but I don't know what it is yet.
I mean, the best I've seen people do is create a separate brand, one for themselves, one for the collective, and that's kind of only a half measure because you're not going to pull all the people from one to the other.
Well, right, exactly. I've spent, like years building up the following that I have, and getting all of those people to go onto one other thing is. I don't want to try that. That sounds.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically
difficult.
an impossibility. And you see this in cross verticals, right? A group podcast and somebody does an individual project, they're not going to pull the same numbers. but it's also kind of like the best that we've got, and I
Yeah.
wonder if it is the best in absolute terms, or simply nobody's figured out a better thing yet.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, that's one of the things that I've been thinking about as a potential solution, and something that I want to try maybe going forward is an extended kind of cooperative model, like similar to what we were doing with the San Gennaro co-op,
mhm,
where like what I would like to do perhaps, and this may not be the best idea. This is something that's really I've only been ticking over a bit, but like what I think could work is if you had like distinct working teams that had their own brands that you were able to sort of like lend a great deal of your support to and bring a lot of people to the table, and then make it very public that there's this team and they're all working on X or whatever, and you're just kind of a person at the table. And then once that brand is kind of established and doing its own thing, you could find another table, right?
mhm.
We could like normalize the idea that we have all of these brands that we kind of use to put out content that maybe are like headed by someone in particular or are like owned by several people.
I mean, you're almost describing what in music a supergroup is.
Yeah, I guess that's sort of what I'm suggesting is that we like. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to be that shocked when I suggest that the solution to a lot of our problems is all of us working together, um, in a variety of different shapes and forms.
No, if they know anything about you, I don't think that's going to be terribly surprising.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
but that's such a solve for so many of our problems. I don't know.
sure,
It's
I mean, it is simultaneously the answer, and it's not the answer anyone really wants. They want something more complicated than that. Um, so speaking of San Gennaro, how did you arrive at co-op as the structure for what you were doing? Was it that you started having to do production work and you found that you didn't like the way that it was set up and you wanted to do something closer to a co-op model, or like
no, no, no. It was almost we came at it from the complete other direction.
okay.
We were in. I was a member of the Discord channel, the San Gennaro Discord channel, Olivia Hill's Players. Um, and we were all hanging out and we were sort of talking about how frustrating all the variety of models that we have out there for making stuff collectively or as groups or by ourselves or whatever. We were just all frustrated. We were all sitting around and whining. And I I mean it was a sentiment that a lot of people sort of got around the same time, was that, well, why don't we try, we're all communists, so why don't we try making why don't we try it a different way? Why don't we try like a collective model? Why don't we try
Sure.
doing a co-op thing? And like I'll say I think the only thing that I really did of that was of great import at the San Gennaro co-op, the main thing that I'd say I did was that like at the moment that people were excited about it, I said, okay, let's make something right now. Let's just get something together. Let's get everybody working on a thing,
Sure.
and let's get it out, and let's get like people downloading it, and we will just go right now, like foot on the pedal, go. Um, and that's what it was. Like that's we knocked together the Short Games Digest
Hmm.
in no time at all. The point of it was to get more people making games, and it
Hmm.
was to give people experience, it was to get people a credit, and it was to get people money, and it was to get people producing their art in a public way that were just unable to do it without that kind of support. Like there are the vast majority of people out there who are making games right now are making them for 10 people that aren't clicking their links. Like
Hmm.
they have less than 100 followers and they are like frustrated. And we were friends with a bunch of people like that, and we said, let's just do it. Let's like there are I had a bit of a following. Olivia Hill obviously has like a large
Hmm.
following. Lots of people we had a couple of people in the group who had big followings, and then we had a couple of people, the majority of people, who had nobody. And we said, right, well, we can retweet your stuff. We can talk about your stuff on our thing. We can
Hmm.
like we can make stuff together, and like we can lend all of our stuff together, and all of us can be elevated at once. Because people will dig what I'm doing because people like my stuff, and if I do cool stuff, more people will follow me, and immediately I'll get to put those people's eyes on your stuff, and like we'll grow together. And it worked. It totally worked. everybody in the co-op like made, first of all, an absolutely excellent game, an excellent collection of games. A lot of these people made their first games. A lot of these people like had never made thought about making a game in their life, and all of those short games digests are like outstanding,
Mhm.
just fantastic work. Having having people who were all coming at this from different angles, collaborating with like people who had been here for a while, it was just fantastic. It was a great energy. People were making all kinds of cool stuff. Um, so it worked. They made a cool thing. It hit top sellers.
Mhm.
For the first, I think they still do when they come out. It got everybody involved, like a bunch of new followers and a bunch of like new community came together. People were like uplifting each other. It introduced a lot of people to like the wider community. It got like people's names in people's mouths. It was a really, really successful product. And like then we did the Heists Kickstarter, and that was again phenomenally successful for a group of people who like had on average like 400 followers. We got like $30,000 to make a book.
Mhm.
That is wild.
Yeah, that thing
And that
blew up.
and that worked because there wasn't just one person retweeting their own shit every single day. It's that we had 30 people constantly yelling about everybody else's shit all the
Mhm.
time. And you, even if those people don't have a big following, the algorithm goes, oh, 30 likes, 30 retweets, better like start showing this to more people, and this
Mhm.
is clearly going to be popular. And like it worked really well. That's why like the co-op model is the thing that and more collaborative work is the thing that I'm like always parroting, because like it works really well, it works really, really well.
Would you would you do it again?
Yeah,
Would you
yeah,
start another co-op?
of course, of course. It might it like
What
it
would
might
you
not be as far away as all that what if. Like it's something that I'm like always trying to figure out ways to pull people together to do something like that again.
where do you think it's most fitting, impactful? I'm trying to think of the right word, right? I don't. This might just be my limited imagination, but I have a harder time coming up with a picture in my head of what a trad games traditional distro co-op would look like than I do, say, an indie games co-op or an OSR co-op. Those kind of immediately there's a picture in my head. I know what that looks like.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
do you feel that there's space for the co-op model to grow and be in those other areas, or do the logistics and the communities that those areas serve mark co-ops as something that has kind of natural limits? Why haven't co-ops grown more, I guess, is the core of the question.
Yeah, I think it's fair to ask. I think there's a lot of reasons. I think you're asking like two questions there, right?
Sure.
And I think one of those is like why aren't um why aren't more businesses co-ops? And
Mm.
then can co-ops be like an effective tool outside of like an indie space?
Yes, basically.
Right. And I think there's a couple of different answers there as well. First of all, I think there's societally and like culturally a reason that co-ops don't exist all that much. I don't think they're incentivized. I don't think that they're glamorized, and I don't think that they're like, well, in a lot of ways, in practical terms, they're very hard to set up, much harder than you would think.
Mm.
I don't know. Some people may want to guess as to why that might be. Who knows? Who's to say? Um, but for whatever reason, it is hard to set up a co-op legally. It is hard to find people who will tell you about co-ops. It is hard to get the idea to have a co-op in the first place because you're sort of bombarded with a model for how things are. As for how limited co-ops are on a larger scale, I mean, you have examples of a lot bigger companies running on co-ops than you have for like some trad
Sure.
publishers. You have like, there's the I just forgot the name. The company that makes flour, they're all like, there's like a flour company that's run as a co-op,
Hmm.
Red Mill or something like that. It's a rather large one. There are like grocery chains in the UK where I'm from. Co-ops are like many companies are
Mm.
co-ops. Like many companies, like national companies are co-ops, and like they are like operating on different models and different economics than like tabletop RPGs are. But if it's possible in other contexts, there's really no reason why it's impossible here, except for
Sure.
reasons that we can change.
So something I just realized is we've been speaking about co-ops, but for people who don't already know or are familiar with co-ops, we should probably like give a succinct definition.
Yeah.
So what do you see a co-op as?
I'm like a what's the word for it? I'm pretty liberal with this, but like I think that generally speaking, it's understood that a co-op is a business model where everybody working there owns some degree of the business, whatever
Sure.
you want to define that as. Like in the San Gennaro co-op specifically, we would ensure that everybody who worked on a specific project shared in the profits of it to a fair degree. We made sure that everybody was on the same kind of contract, the same idea. We had democratic decision making for like how things have been, pardon me, with like every major choice we had to vote on, that kind of thing. And more traditional co-ops are very similar too. Like they are generally a company that everyone owns some part of it.
Sure. It's a
King
shared.
Arthur Flower is the name of the thing.
Okay. Yeah, it's a shared equity model. So we've talked about the benefits, or some at least, right? There are obviously ethical benefits. There's a very, I think, easy argument to be made for shared ownership of an organization from a agency standpoint, from an incentive standpoint. It's not hard to imagine why that is a beneficial setup. We've also talked about, the marketing benefits, which I think is particularly true in a niche space like we are.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if, a large flower company gets the same kind of marketing benefits.
Probably they're making sales some other way, I reckon.
Yeah,
They're probably not just bugging all their friends and family.
I imagine that is the case. But in our space, it certainly is true that the marketing benefits are substantial.
Yeah.
But I imagine there are also logistical challenges that emerge from such a model. I mean, without talking like to, go into whatever specifics you want.
No, sure. No, I'll get into it.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, totally has logistical issues, and especially like we just talked about that project management isn't a common skill in our community, and not just our community, by the way. Like, basically every indie space is like severely lacking in project management.
Totally.
Getting project management skills is expensive, and like
it's expensive and fairly corporatist.
Yeah, exactly. So there's absolute like I'm not throwing any shade on anybody by saying that those skills are lacking. They're lacking for very like shitty institutional reasons. It's no one's fault. So okay, the problem that you have these logistical issues with these pretty flat like wide company structures, and they are exacerbated by the fact that you don't have good project managers, which is definitely I think one of the reasons that large co-ops will struggle in this space if they don't have one of those boxes ticked.
Sure.
But for the San Gennaro co-op, we were lucky enough to have me and Olivia Hill and one or two other people who had some direct project management experience. So that gave us a huge leg up. So we were able to very effectively split people off into like working groups into like specific chunks of stuff that they had to do, and then like kind of like help people along and give people the support and kind of manage their output easily while being able to do our work and all this other stuff too. It was easy because they were contained, and we designed the books around that too. All the stuff that we came out with, or when I was sort of working there, they were all designed specifically to take advantage of this model. The Roleplayer's Guide to Heists are self-contained. They have very specific headers. The Roleplayer's Guide to Heists, by the way, is a book that we kickstarted. That's the one we mentioned earlier. For anyone watching, it is a collection of very specific, very like guided content, and then the art that came into it, I would handle that as the project manager. I would like secure that, and I would secure the map. So all I needed to worry about was the writers doing their writing, and if one writer messes up in some way or is delayed or isn't able to hand it in, it's no big deal because it's 35 heists. No one's going to miss one missing. And even if they did, well, sorry, that person quit. I don't know what to tell you. Or I could do it myself. Whatever. Anyway, point is, self-contained, and then I would handle just kind of getting the art done, which isn't that hard. It's not that hard for me anyway. It's like a
Sure.
specific skill set. And that way you just kind of minimize the whole problem. And I think that that's the thing that we're going to have to do going forward if we do this more often between ourselves, is just identify the person who knows, or at least is the best at that project management aspect, and kind of like build the structure around the needs of the project in such a way that minimizes those risks of like logistical problems. I don't think you're going to have that problem when it's a lot smaller scale, though.
Sure.
With Engineer Co-op, the problem really was that we had like 20 to 30 people working on a single project sometimes, and so that gets unwieldy and wild.
That's the thing, right? Like, there's when you have a less flat hierarchy, you can in a much easier and I think even more natural way create that kind of unitary cohesion of product.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, I'm issuing a contract for specific work which fits into this slot, which I need filled, because that is a section of the book that needs to be filled. And I think when you create a collection of games, an anthology is it's a different beast, right? It doesn't require the same kind of cohesion. And a lot of that can be dealt with by having a single layout person or a staple of artists so that you have an aesthetic cohesion. Even if the mechanical cohesion isn't there, it's just what's expected in an anthology. But a project like the Heist...
We had to have a voice. We had to have kind of a run through. Everything had to be similar to a certain respect. And we kind of, we were okay with people having their own voices on the project to a degree because that's an attraction for the book. But
sure,
right, it's different because it becomes the shape of the project rather than people conforming to the project itself.
Yeah, I cannot issue an authorial tone. I must see what has been submitted and see where an authorial tone can be found as a through line, which is by no means impossible. I think it's just a different type of editorial skill.
Well, and I'll tell you what, that one of the huge benefits on Heists was that we had one of the best editors I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Grimm was our and is our editor on Heists, and that is he's just fantastic at what he does. I'll have to throw his ad out there, because if you need an editor who is just really, 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 really good at it, he's the guy to go for.
Yeah, full name and ad, please.
Will do.
And that'll go probably as in brackets in the text.
Sure.
So I guess you're no longer doing San Gennaro. We don't have to get into that, but what are you doing now? What is Liam currently occupied with?
Well, we did Disposable Heroes just relatively recently, and that's chugging along. Probably have that out. Depending on this whole virus stuff. I'm still assuming that we hit the. I'm still assuming we hit the release date. I don't see that being a problem. Which is probably like a part of the book that would be screenshotted, like for future generations. Go, it didn't come out till 2028. No, it'll probably be fine. So that was fun. And it's a cool game. I'm excited to get that out. That'll be like the first game I've ever like shipped properly from my house. Like,
so you did you did an offset print run for that and are getting the pallets sent to you?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. I probably will never do anything like that again.
Yeah.
Or print on demand ever again. The thing that I'm hoping to do, if I can convince people, is like PDF only for a little bit, because I don't know why anybody.
I think that's where we're moving.
I mean, I can't afford to make books anymore.
No, and I think what has slowly been developing is physical book as luxury product. Right? It is occupying a different product segment than it did even a few years ago.
And the thing with that is, I'm better off, at least for my model, I'm better off waiting to see if the thing is any like responded to all that
Yeah,
well, and then buying an offset print somewhere else down the line to send out to conventions and stuff than I am putting all the time in on Kickstarter on something that I don't know is going to be worth it. But if I
sure.
promise it on Kickstarter, well, now I have to.
Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting watching what happens in the coming months regarding distros, whether or not the big ones stay alive,
Mm-hmm.
and the big publishers that have dealt primarily in the hardback trade, right? Like, I think we're going to see a world in which the Paizo model no longer exists,
Mm.
where it's going to be something closer to what, like, Michael Prescott did with Trilemma Adventures. Primarily POD or PDF only, with a limited, very high-end collector's print run.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly my thought for the Kickstarter that I'm playing right now. Like, we're working on a game called Monster Care Squad.
That's right. First time I saw you talk about that was today, tweeting like a couple hours ago. Tell me more about that.
It's really cool. It's like Monster Hunter, but instead of killing the monster, you heal it. It's been poisoned by a shadowy evil group that exists purely to give you a reason to track down these incredible monsters and have cool encounters with them. There's no combat mechanics. It's all about being like a cool monster vet. I'm really excited for it, and people like are very very hyped for it. A lot more than I expected.
Yeah, I mean, you got the insanely successful and brilliant creators of Disco Elysium liking that, which is certainly something to have bragging rights about.
I'm not gonna say that I commissioned a piece of art of some monster care specialists who look exactly like Kim and Harry from Disco Elysium to put in the book. But I did, and it's gonna be in the book because you can do whatever you want when
Yeah,
you're the person making the thing. You can do whatever you want.
ain't no
No,
rules.
no one could stop me from putting Kim Kitsuragi and Harry Dubois in Monster Care Squad. It's a tribute.
Yeah. So this is more pertaining to a thought I had the other day, but I think it's probably a pretty common thought in the industry these days, which is as we're moving toward more. I think that the space overall has been moving in a direction of either looser, lighter, or harder to strictly define mechanics. Um, we've been moving away from the riffs, GURPS, 3.5 school of mechanize everything in a very tight way. And that has worked traditionally very well for CRPGs, right? It's a video game, you need to mechanize these things. Even if you put it in the background, you need to understand how they're going to reliably function. And when you look at like the output of itch, or even a lot of like drive-through, right? We're moving away from that. We're moving back towards a rulings, not rules world, as they might say in an OSR space. I don't think there is a pithy way to say that in indie space other than, I don't know, yes and. Which is really more of an improv thing, right?
Hey.
Like, yeah.
You're right.
So we have something like Disco Elysium, which is this breath of fresh air, and I attribute that a lot to the fact that they kind of made an analog game before they made it digital. If
You know that's literally true, right?
yeah, no. I mean, I go back and see some of their earlier blog posts in the development cycle, and they're talking about making a tabletop game.
It's a role playing game setting. Disco
Yeah.
Elysium is set in like their they have like they've been playing it for like 20 years or something ridiculous thing like that. Yeah.
Honestly, I would love to see that analog system come out.
Yeah.
I'd be fascinated by that.
Yeah, people are always asking for it in their Discord. I used to be in the Disco Elysium Discord for a little bit, and like people are always asking for it. Like, yeah, it's I think it's a thing that they're thinking about maybe putting out there.
Sure.
It's kind of wild to think that like Baldur's Gate and stuff are all based on these D&D settings, right? And like they're kind of established places. It's kind of funny that we just played like something in somebody's like homebrew, right? That doesn't happen all. Yeah.
that's Greyhawk, right? That's
Yeah,
Black
yeah, I
Moor.
guess
That's
you're right.
the uh, everything from 1E is kind of playing in somebody else's homebrew,
Yeah,
and then it just gets
that's totally
published.
true.
Um,
It's pretty cool.
it is.
I
I
don't
mean,
know.
it shows the possibility of having a wider impact with your kind of friends group fanfic
Yeah,
setting that you throw together. But I guess the direction I wanted to go with that is where do you see things moving from here? What is your outlook, not just organizationally, but kind of a broader
mechanically and
gestalt?
stuff.
Yeah, mechanically, the wider acceptance of the industry. A thing that I've been noticing that's very strange to me is I and this is a thing that happened previously years ago, but it's happening again. IPs that are not tabletop games are getting tabletop adaptations. There was a long period of time where that wasn't true, right? But we're
Hmm.
going back to what essentially existed in the mid '90s, where you get things
Alien
like
just got one, right? Like,
Alien just got one, a big one,
yeah,
and this is happening more and more, and it's happening from lots of different types of media, right? Where
a bunch of Amazon shows got some,
yep,
and N.K. Jemisin just
yep,
is gonna make one for her setting. Yeah, it's definitely a time right now where people are thinking that having a role playing game as a part of your IP is like a wise decision or something to be done in some way, something like
it's
for whatever reason.
and I think for a lot of people who, know, some of us have been observers of the industry for a long time, but the people who have been part of the industry actively for a long time are kind of few and far between. Um,
Hmm.
I could I could make a list of 50, and that probably covers the world.
Yeah.
Um, where do you think where do you think we go from here? Is that sustainable? Is that what we have for the future? Do we have kind of growth in the industry by way of kind of moving toward a digital frontier where the production costs are lower and having platforms like Kickstarter where we're able to do this? I mean, board games have traditionally dominated, but in a world where supply chains are screwy and funding is bad and people have low tolerance for 1,000 high price point games and we can just make simple PDFs, do RPGs have a bright future or are things more concerning? Unanswerable question, right?
Yeah.
This is just what does Liam think about the future?
It's good because this gets like written down. So like no matter what I say,
Mm-hmm.
someone in the future gets to go, look at this fucking
Yeah, well,
has
that's
no fucking clue what he's talking
yeah,
about. Hey.
yeah. 12
Yeah.
months down the line, somebody's gonna realize how fucking wrong you were.
Yeah. I
That's the
see
fun.
you, reader. I see you. Um I don't know. I mean, here's the real answer that I have is that like art movements work in cycles and um I view tabletop RPGs as an art form and I view the ebbs and flows of it in similar ways. I think we are in a movement right now that is defined by the things that you said, the looser mechanics, the sort of fiction first. I think is how a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people refer to like these systems,
Mm-hmm.
um, identified by like Powered by the Apocalypse and other games like that. I think that we are in a movement, like a moment,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know what comes after that because historically, what tends to happen is either a reaction or like a lean in,
Yeah.
like a deconstruction. And I don't know which one of those is gonna hit. I don't know if like there will be like a hard shift further toward like harder mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I like we'll see. I mean, one of the things about tabletop RPGs that is interesting is that like we all disagree on how to do it right. You know, like we all don't
Yeah.
we're all in a permanent disagreement with the exact way to pretend properly. And like I know most of us don't frame it that way, but like your method of playing pretend in a specific setting to create a specific vibe and a specific whatever is probably different from my preferred way.
Sure.
And like that's
Uh,
kind of weird, which
the odds are almost certainly yes.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
And
I
that's kind of odd for an art form. Like there are obviously different genres in art, but there's like I don't know if like I don't know if it's quite the same vibe. Um,
I personally use a structure that is closer to looking at RPGs as religious and ritual than art forms,
I
and
think I've
almost
read some of your tweets about this.
yeah, like I think of the way in which we play pretend differently as a way of performing rituals, and the arguments are essentially arguments over heresies.
Listen, I like it. I like it. It's
It's
good because you get to use heresy, which is always a good. If you have the opportunity to
to
say the
use
word
heresy.
heresy, or
Yep,
yeah,
go for it always. But it for me explains the vitriol,
hmm
right? There's sure somebody might not like pop music or not like country, but it's very rare that somebody goes, if you like country, you are a fundamentally despicable human, you have nothing important to say, and if I understand that you like country, I'm going to block you on sight.
I mean, except for like music made by like. I'm just saying that like people do in fact say that about like rap and hip hop,
Sure.
and like
There,
yeah,
there, there are people who do that, but it is not the norm of people who listen to music.
and I think we understand their sort of beliefs to be kind of like racist and part of a
Totally.
wider sort of
Yeah. I mean, and
general hatred of other people.
we have some of that, right? Like I always
Yeah, no,
bring
absolutely.
I always bring up My Frog. I always bring up ACKS. There are games made by just bad people,
Oh yeah, for sure.
and there is genuine exclusion that occurs along
A
like.
lot of a lot of very very popular games.
Hmm.
A lot of the biggest games that there are made by absolutely trashy people.
Yeah, and that's kind of an unfortunate truth. But for me, the uniformity of the view
Mm.
doesn't make sense within a framework of an arts community. I know that what we are producing is art, right? Fundamentally, even at its most consumerist basis, right? The people who are working on 5e might be doing so for purely commercial reasons, but it is still an art.
Yeah, right.
The people who consume actual plays are still consuming an art, but
Mhm.
the reverence and idolatry, and on the flip side, the hatred and vitriol of the other seems so much stronger than we have in most other art forms. As this is the joke I always have, is when you have any outsider come into the medium, they almost immediately, but very quickly at least, realize, oh, this is the hardest community to be in because everyone hates each other, and nobody understands why. And it really just comes down to like, oh, because they play pretend different than me. Um,
I think that like I think that last comment I think has some. There's an article out there that talks about how like the LGBTQ community is like hard and like
mm,
rough on itself, and it's largely sort of an adaptation to like shared trauma that like you're
totally.
so on edge all the time. And what I think a lot of our community deals with is that like a similar sort of situation. I think
100%.
predominant. I'm not going to say like I'm not going to say numbers. I'm not going to say majority or whatever, but
Sure.
I think that like a significant percent of the people that I follow on Twitter and the people whose opinions I see every day and the people whose like lives I'm taking part in some way, shape, or form are some member of a marginalized class.
Hmm.
And I think that there exists a friction there because we're all hurting for a variety of different reasons, and it makes it really easy to kind of like it makes it easy. It makes it hard to be soft and gentle to people, and
Sure.
it makes it hard to like make friends
It
in
makes it
that way.
easy to lash out
And
when.
and exacerbating that is the fact that we're all also competing, even if we don't acknowledge it, even
Mhm,
if no one wants to say it, we are all trying to get paid.
mhm,
And we are all trying to get paid, hopefully from one another. Like that's a lot of people come in and follow people because they want them to see their work
mhm.
in whatever method that means. And so there's that element of like cutthroat kind of like I a lot of folks out there, the economic study that I did asked the question if games income was people's primary income.
Mhm.
And more people than you would be comfortable hearing answered yes to that, including lots and lots of people who are earning like not an amount that you can imagine a human being living on.
Yeah.
So So when I saw those numbers, I was like, oh god, that's why everyone's so fucking on edge all the time.
I mean,
That's
it
why
is
we're all so upset. We're all a bunch of
we're struggling, traumatized individuals by and large,
yeah.
performing rituals that we hang our entire lives on. That from an outside audience seems like make pretend, but like it's why I think critique is so poorly received.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
because
absolutely
it's
why.
perceived as attack.
Yeah,
Um,
and it doesn't help that we all already started all these cliques already based on like what side of a specific sort of argument you came down on
mhm.
when you heard about it. You may not have even been around when that thing kicked off, and
Yeah,
you're still like, sooner or later you're asked to kind of like say, well, who do you think is right out of that fight,
yeah.
and who do you think did that? And like both sides will be telling you one thing or a different, and it's like it's
I
you
think
come into these little boxes, and then those little boxes are full of people who also are angry and hurt and yelling at each other all the time, and then your box yells at another box, and it just
I think the question here, right? Because a lot of this has just been kind of rambling and statements, but the question I have for you
that's
here is,
okay.
what accepting this is basically true, right? Whether or not other people agree, if we in the confines of this discussion accept what we just said as a basically true premise,
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean for the long-term cohesion of co-ops?
I mean, that's why you need the co-ops. That's the whole point. If you do the co-op, you get rid of like half the shit that's killing you already. If you're all working together to get paid, and if the amount that you get paid is linked to the amount that you get paid, or that I get paid, or that they get paid, if my success means that you do better too, I am not going to be at your throat. I'm not going
Yeah.
to say anything to you. You're my friend.
Mm-hmm.
And if my success writ large, if the group that I just put together made a bunch of money and we're all sitting happy and we've got our Nintendo Switches and we're playing Animal Crossing and it's all good, if I see another co-op
Mm-hmm.
getting started, I want them to succeed. I want them to be like up with me because I know it works. And I know if they do well, maybe I can work with them next time. Or maybe I can work with the other co-op that pops up. And you break down that at least one of those fucking factors. You're no longer having to compete against each other for money, even if you're only making as much money as you were making before
Mm-hmm.
anyway.
I mean, it creates a fundamental reason to cooperate,
Everyone's
right?
got to work together. Like that's it.
Um,
Like there's no it's that or we eat ourselves alive every like 6 months and then no talent stays around for any amount of time. How many people do you think of like decided they're not going to do this anymore
oh
because every
yeah,
3 months their fucking Twitter explodes
I've
over
I've
some
I've only been around 5 years,
Mhm.
maybe 6 now, right? Like I would say the first time I really got involved in a professional capacity was 2014. Um, that is so much longer than the average tenure in our
Mhm.
community.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
people come in, they're excited, they make something new, and then they burn out. Not because they themselves burn out, but because they are burned out by the collective. Because we have such a competitive, fierce, traumatized group, and we need something to bridge that.
I
To
mean, yeah. To be clear, there is also a very large group of very privileged, shitty assholes who
sure.
spend a great deal of time directing enormous numbers of shitty people to otherwise like kind, well-meaning, wonderful
Mm-hmm.
human beings. And that more often than not is the beginning of a of a discourse. Like
Mm-hmm.
that usually is like one day someone woke up and decided to fuck over someone worse off than themselves.
Yeah,
I
and that's
mean,
I think that's the other challenge, right? Is that we have to acknowledge that simultaneously a large portion, you're right, don't peg a number to it, but I think within certain subsets of the community, it is a vast majority of individuals who participate who are dealing with their own trauma,
mhm.
right? Um, and we have this large portion of those people, and it's a lot of times, in my opinion, an unacknowledged trauma, right? It's not a trauma that's necessarily being processed through the collective in the healthiest of ways.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm pretty guarded with a lot of my stuff because
Totally.
I don't feel comfortable talking to most people about it. Like,
Yeah. If I hadn't been in therapy since I was 3 years old, I doubt I would be. But
yeah,
like I've spent my entire life talking about this shit, so I feel like
sure.
I've just gotten to the point where it's like, all right, fine, I'll say it, and you can attack me, drag me to death. I don't care. But then you also have all these people who are, yeah, I mean, shitty, privileged, on the offensive, looking to climb the ladder by stepping on somebody else's fingers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think. There's a question there about making cooperatives, but identifying who it's safe to make cooperatives with, identifying
Oh
who's
yeah.
on the same page as you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess just in your experience, how have you navigated that?
I mean, I wouldn't work with someone if I didn't like them, right? Like,
Sure.
I'm not even people who just do like sort of editing or like lettering for me. Like, I don't want to work with people who I don't find like personally like someone who I like a lot.
Hmm.
And like, I don't know, I have a good sense for that sort of thing. I guess I've enjoyed working with everybody who I've worked with, and like I curate my space pretty strongly, you know, both actively and like via like blocking or muting or
Sure.
kicking people out of my thing, or just through like broadcasting my ideas and ideologies out there. That tends to like thin out the people who like don't want to be around or who I
Hmm.
wouldn't want to work with. Um, and I mean, that's where it's got to begin, right? Like that's where you've got to start. You've got to start with people you like. You've got to start with people who you can imagine navigating like complex financial decisions with,
Sure.
without like wanting to kill them. One comment that I wanted to say before like we move on from the abuse thing,
Sure.
I wanted to mention that like one of the problems that we have is that the community is led by like people of color and LGBTQ people. The art form itself is pushed by those groups.
Hmm.
It is like our women and our like, you know, all of our marginalized like identities in this community that are making the most interesting content, that are like pushing out the most like fabulous games. And then by and large it is like more privileged people who go, neat, and here's a game that I'm going to make that is the same, but I'm going to be much more successful
Yeah.
and like whatever. Or like I I am Wizards of the fucking Coast, and I'm gonna lift all the good stuff out of that, and I'm gonna make millions of dollars on my book.
Yeah.
And like that that empowers people who've done absolutely nothing to get that power, and then that's why they treat us like shit.
Yeah. I mean, there's to take. I'm not disagreeing at all, but I think the view from the other side is like, why would I treat these people better when they're essentially disposable and replaceable, right?
Well,
If
I
if I
mean, it's
if
yeah,
I treat the artistic community so poorly that they all leave, a lot of people are going to come back in.
yeah.
Maybe
No,
not
you're
the
right.
same people, but there's always going to. It is an essentially infinite and always replenished commodity, and I
It's the
can just,
same problem that video games had
yeah.
and has, and for decades. It's the exact same thing that you can, and we're just talking about this in kind of like a broader community scope.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look through the history of basically any larger traditional tabletop RPG publishing company, you will see the exact same kind of fucking turnover
Oh
and
yeah.
like just, oh, that writer worked for one book and then they were gone. That artist worked for one thing and then they were gone.
Mm-hmm.
And their names are on no other credits anywhere else. They're done.
Yeah.
Like we're not even touching on those people who like we'll never see again.
I mean, I've one of the things that I've always wanted that I don't think I will ever get unless I don't know. There's clap on lights, very nice. But I don't think there's any way I'm ever going to get this just because of the burden of doing it. But I'd love to see a large scale meta analysis of the names in books.
Hmm.
How many
That
people
would be really
recur?
interesting.
How often they recur? Um,
Yeah.
what is the average number of products somebody works on before they just disappear? GDC did that a few years ago for video games and found I think the average tenure in the industry was something like 3 years.
Wow.
People spend more time getting the degree to
Yeah.
get into the industry than they spend in the industry before they leave. Um,
That's wild.
yeah,
I
right?
mean,
It's nuts.
I mean, I've only been here a couple of years, and like the names are already different, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I I know that like it's frustrating for younger designers to kind of like hear old heads like babble on about back in the day and shit. Like I get it. I'm sorry, but like I am older than most of you, and I
Yeah.
have been here. And I'm not saying that me being here longer makes me any more valid than y'all, but I dragged my old corpse over the line. Um, and the names are different. In
Hmm.
like 4 or 5 years, the names have changed completely. I don't follow the people I used to follow don't tweet anymore,
Yeah.
and like
So many people are gone or very passively involved.
yeah.
You have the big names, right? Like the big companies are largely still around, but
Mm-hmm.
in the smaller spaces, like when I first came in, the names that were on the books at the Indie Press Revolution table, they're basically all different now.
Yeah.
And even what they carry is less important, right? If I were to say where is the interesting artistic output coming from, it's not stuff that a consolidator is picking up because they're not doing offset print runs of it. It's
Right.
on itch or occasionally drive through.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a physical copy, it's, I don't know, a POD or sold through Lulu. I go to a con and I see stuff that's cool and interesting for me as kind of an old head who still loves trad games in some part, but like I don't see the stuff that I very rarely see things that get me excited from an
Mm-hmm.
artistic standpoint in that setting. Um, it's interesting.
Yeah. It is.
It's a weird place to be,
Yeah.
being an old head
Yeah.
in an industry that has so few old heads. Um,
Yeah.
and like understanding that because I'm an old head like doesn't make me special in any way, and yet I still do have more of a historical grounding to kind of like observe these almost tragic trends. Um,
I mean, it's about how you share the info, right?
sure.
It's about you can be like a valuable member of the community being around. It depends if we're kind of like
Yeah.
shitty about it.
Yeah. Are you trying to impart knowledge upon people, or are you trying to gatekeep?
Right. Or
Um,
just show off, or just try to be like, well, I've been here. So,
like I, what does it mean that I've been here? I've been around enough to have lunch with a few people at Gen Con.
and
Cool.
like, right, I've only just started being able to like like, pay myself anything for my games. It took me
Sure.
this long to get here. No, clearly that's just a sign that I am significantly worse at this than most of y'all. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what I was doing, but I've caught up. Just
Just enough.
please don't do anything cooler than what you currently do, because then I'll look very tame by comparison.
Yeah. Um, I mean, we're at an hour 12. We've crossed our baseline benchmark. Is there anything else you want to talk about? I'm good to keep going.
Nothing comes immediately to mind. Um, we can talk about the game I'm making if we want, but I like nothing other than that. I
Sure.
mean, I don't like just want this to be like a promo piece.
I don't. I don't care. Right? If you have interesting things to say about it and how you've developed it and what it is, that's valuable. Right? Whether or not it's promo. And plus, it's not really promo because the vast majority of people who are going to see this, it's going to be so long after the thing drops.
Yeah, in a book months from now.
Yeah, like it's it's fine. Promo the hell out of yourself because I think you'll say something interesting in the process.
I was just gonna talk about like Monster Care Squad has been an interesting experience in the last couple of weeks, because trying to navigate some of the problems I talked about earlier with like my creative output being such that I can't really like fund it when it comes up.
Hmm.
I have like 3 or 4 games constantly like in the go, and I can't put all of them on Kickstarter. That won't work. Um, but so I sat down and I was like, I'll make this game while I wait for the art for all this other stuff to finish. And it will be like a small game. I think I can get away with it being just a little small thing, right? Like I think the people will give me like just enough money to make this little game, and I'll make a little game. And then I released the art for it the other day, and like it's gotten more attention than literally any other project that I've ever done. It's like by far and away the most successful. Hasn't launched yet, and it's already gotten like more attention than the majority of my Kickstarters did in their run. I have like 5 podcasts who are talking about wanting to run it or feature me on them, and I've got like news people coming, and like this has never happened to me before. I'm not showing off here. I am terrified. I am woefully unprepared for this experience. And like, it's great because I got to give all of the people collaborating with me. I just said, well, that pay bump we were talking about, like if we fund for like just that's the base rate from now on, no big deal. Like we'll work up from there. And that was cool. But on the other hand, it was only going to be a tiny game, small little thing. The lesson there is the art. I think really like it did really the art was very 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 vibrant.
Then this is a thing that I think can't be understated. If there is
have
any
the nice pictures.
Yeah, if there's any skill in this business that makes money, it's aesthetics. It's not mechanics.
And that word though is important. Aesthetics. Mm-hmm. That word is I'm pointing the wrong place. That word is important. Aesthetics. My tip to anybody watching and for future, if I can only say one thing for games design, and have it go down, don't do like realistic fantasy drawings and stuff. Don't do. If you can help it, if you're not one of those fucking like Wizards of the Coast people who gotta do it, right? If you can help it, you find one of those really fucking cool indie artists that have like 20 followers or something, and they're making art that looks like nothing that you've ever seen, and go to them and be like, hey, I want to make a book with you, and I want to like, your shit is really cool. I'm gonna make something with you, and like I'll pay you whatever you want. We'll run a Kickstarter for it, and we will make something really fucking cool together. That will get you more eyes on your shit than anything else will, because you'll have something that nobody else. Here's the fucking thing. Nobody plays these goddamn games. Nobody uses their systems, right? No one rolls their dice. The vast majority of people who buy these books buy them because they love how they look and they like the aesthetic that you sell and the world that you put in your pictures. Because most of them aren't even going to read the lore that you wrote.
I mean, they are Taschen books. They are coffee table books, by and large.
They are to look at the cool pictures in for the vast majority of time. And I am not trying to diminish anybody's work. I'm a writer like myself. That's what I do. But like you've got to be aware of the fact that the vast majority of people are in it to look at cool pictures and see cool aesthetics that they cannot get anywhere else. And they can always get like an Aragorn looking motherfucker with like a boot and like a bow, and they're doing like this thing.
And I don't give a shit.
No one does. No one does it anymore. You've got to give them a look that, even if the idea is old, even if you're still just doing a fantasy setting, you got to find someone whose idea of a fantasy setting is visibly and radically different from all the others.
I will buy 1,000 copies of the Rules of BX if the art is different in every single copy and interesting.
Yeah.
I would. That's fine.
And interesting is the important thing. It's just you gotta find something.
And this is my day job, right? Like I need to learn mechanics. This is an important thing in how I make money, and even I, by and large, am not. I'm interested when I see something dramatically new. But most of what is out there is just iterations on things that I've already seen, and I don't. It might be cool. It might be good for a session. But I'm not going to spend 8 hours learning a system to run one game. I am, however, going to spend $50 on a book that looks rad as hell and keep it on my shelf.
Yeah.
Whatever the content.
Right, and the rad as hell look, more often than not, well, like that's you bought that because that's going to influence your games and stuff anyway. It's like, it's a part of it.
I'm going to run whatever I'm going to run, but the fact that I saw your art and it gave me really valuable ideas is more important to me than the system that you put together for that art.
I think that, like, for me, like, personally, my own process generally sort of falls somewhere in the middle. Okay. I tend to find parts of a game that I really, really like, an element of it that I really like to play with.
Sure.
And that often either gets directly pulled into like whatever homebrew is going on at the time, or like is the part of the game that we focus on the most when we play it, and that's like the love of it.
Sure.
But like every book that I've ever looked at that has art in it has influenced every other thing that I've ever done from that point on.
Yeah.
Most games that I've read have gotten to that point, but the number of games that I've read versus books that I own is like.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And I mean, I do not mean to outright diminish the value of innovative mechanics. Again, this is an important part of my work.
Yeah, I mean, it's my job. It's literally all I do.
Basically,
right?
Same, right? Like, understanding even the minute differences between something, right? Like, understanding how 30 different PBTA games are meaningfully different from each other is a skill, and it's an important skill, and it enables you to be a better creator within that space. To see the fine differences helps guide you when you're doing your own thing. But the lay audience for your product is not a designer.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think that's a part of it that is often forgotten in this process, and like the actual identity of. Have you all read these big expensive RPGs that are at the games shows? They're not very good games.
Most of them are actively bad games.
They are not games that I could imagine people playing a lot. Like, even for some of I've read some of these books for for IPs that I love.
Sure.
Like that I am a big fan of, and I might take. Go ahead.
I think a lot about the Witcher game, to use a very specific example.
Yeah, I think a lot about the Witcher game too.
I walked
garbage.
Up to the. It's travesty.
It's very bad. I walked up to the person at the booth at Gen Con, and I was dressed as Geralt. I had like a very, very ornate costume on, and I was like looking through the book. I thought it was being cute, you know. And the guy came over and he said, "Hey, what's up?" I don't know who it was. Someone manning the booth. And they were explaining the rules to me, and it was very clear that they liked the rules, and that's fine. If it's a game that they enjoy, I have no problem with that. But they were telling me the rules, and I was like, that doesn't sound very much like The Witcher to me.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like very much like how The Witcher works. The person mentioned like a merchant class, and I said, a merchant class? I didn't say that out loud because I'm a polite human being. I'm not a shitty person. This person's doing their job, whatever. But they said a merchant class, and I said to myself, huh, that's not. I mean,
Yeah.
That's none of the members of The Witcher that I played were like buying and selling, like trading between towns. That wasn't a part of the. It's about killing monsters and stuff, right?
Yeah.
If I remember rightly.
Maybe like courtly intrigue.
Right. But sorry, the point that I was going to dovetail off of yours is they're all like that. They're all like that. They're all like you go to buy the fucking, you know, pick an IP. You go to buy the Lego Movie game and you expect to have an adventure in Magic Legoland, and the books, they always have like 400 classes for like, you are a chicken in Legoland, and like, why would I want? Like, I don't know why I would want to do that. Here are extensive farming rules. That's not why I bought this game.
There are. I'm not going to shit on all IPs, right? One of the people I interviewed earlier was Sam Webb, who runs product at Modiphius, and Modiphius's business, by and large, is just IP-based shit.
There are tons of good IP games. No, my point was just that there are a lot of them that are getting a lot of money. That are getting a lot of money and selling a bunch of books and being madly successful, and it's not because of the very bad rules that are inside them.
No.
It's because they got a pretty picture of Geralt on the front.
That's it. And people read through it, and they might run a couple sessions of it before they go back to 5e.
Yeah.
And that is the lay audience.
Do you think the IP is the thing? Do you think that's where it's at?
I think it can be.
Do you think we got to get... I mean, how... I would love to... Here's a game that I'd like to make, and I think that this would be interesting from a lot of different points. There's a series of books called The City of Miracles. By Robert Bennett, and they're very, very good books, or they're, at least as far as, you know, I like them a lot. I don't know. They are set in a fallen empire, right? Like a slightly modern. It's kind of got like a Cossack-y Russian feel to it. The world, and the plot is that this large continent used to be in control of everywhere. It used to be the main superpower, and it used to actively kind of oppress and colonize this island chain because they had gods. They had these beings that had like magic superpowers, and they could do whatever they want. And They had like miracles, and they all had themes and stuff. Until someone from the island came and shot all the gods, and now all the gods are dead. And
Okay.
what you have play out then is a spy thriller in this cool sort of setting, this cool sort of world. And it spreads out across 3 books, and it's a really, really neat series. I really like it. I recommend everyone read it. I would love to make that game for a variety of reasons. One, it's a really cool setting. But 2, it would be interesting to see if that IP, which I don't think, like, Robert Bennett, I love your book. You're a very successful author. You're much more successful than me. But I think it's a relatively niche
Sure.
thing. It's got a lot of fans, but I don't, like, it's not quite on the scale of, Superman or something.
Sure.
It doesn't have a Netflix series. Yeah, it's not like The Witcher. It doesn't have a Netflix series. It would be interesting to see how much that IP like boosts the visibility, the viability of the product. If I just like attached a system to it and put it out, like, would that be enough to carry it or not?
I think there is evidence. So if I'm looking at like the history of IP-based games, and we're going all the way back here, right? We're going to Dallas and Rocky and Bullwinkle from TSR.
I was about to say we're doing Dallas.
Yeah, like I don't think a successful IP is enough to have a successful product line. I think it is enough to have a successful product launch. I think if an IP is pretty well married to the mechanics within it, that can be enough. And that's where you get into things like MERP, Middle-earth role-playing, and more modern things like Cubicle 7's runs, where, like, yeah, Doctor Who as an IP sells a lot of games. That game also could be a lot worse. It certainly is not as bad as The Witcher or the Men in Black game. And I think you have evidence that low-level, low-interest IPs do grow your audience if the game is pretty decent. And the case study there for me is The Laundry, which was a Cubicle 7 game about a British organization that dealt with like Cthulhu monsters. And it's based on a series of books, and it's like a moderately successful series of books, but it's not the huge big thing.
Right.
But they were able to keep that line running for multiple years at a pretty decent product sales rate. I think that was not because the game was exceptional. It was fine. But because it was a fine game with a decent IP attached to it.
It got much further
than it otherwise would have. I do think the bigger your IP, the more chance you have to do something with that. Like, if the Witcher game didn't suck so hard, I think you could have had it become a successful product line, but I can't imagine people picking it up, playing it, and not wanting to just run Witcher games in 5e. I just can't.
I think that's a very good observation. I think I agree with that.
There are exceptions, right? I don't think anyone ever really loved, as far as I'm aware, the FFG Warhammer 40k RPGs. They were fine. They did some interesting things, but they were kind of a mess. But those lines... I
played the Deathwatch one quite a lot.
Yeah. Those lines were very successful. I think that has to do with the strength of the IP and the audience for that IP.
I was going to say, you think there's a lot of cross-pollination there? I think there's already kind of an existing...
Yeah, I think a lot of people bought those essentially for the lore. Because if you read through, like, the Deathwatch series, right, there is more canonical information about the Deathwatch in those RPG books than in pretty much anything else in all of 40k. Than in novels, than in the tabletop game. If you love the Deathwatch, where you learn about the Deathwatch is the Deathwatch RPG.
And hey, we're talking about how art shifts stuff. FFG is basically like that, or was RIP, was sort of that, like, turn to 11, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Their books were pretty.
Their books were very pretty.
Most of their games are... FFG had some pretty cool games, but most of them were kind of like, eh. But they were the most beautiful ones
once
out
they
there.
They got around to the Genesis dice mechanic, or what later would be issued as Genesis, so the Star Wars games in particular, I think they had something going mechanically married with a good IP. Like, that is a key modern example of how you do it right. They've also done a lot of bad, but, like, they are pretty. They are interesting art. Not fast, not like, interesting's not the right word. They're very pretty art turned up to 11.
Yeah. They're doing the same thing. They're doing the thing that we were talking about earlier. They're the people who are going to shift books on having like hyper realistic characters, because they're going to be able to afford to pay someone to spend like
to have like
all month on a single
30
portrait.
full page yellows and like 100 spot illustrations and
Right.
like have it all be pretty.
You can't afford that indie scene.
No.
I'm sorry, I can't. No one can.
No.
It also doesn't work. They're not there anymore.
There's a reason. I want to say their name is Tithi Luithong, I think, is an artist whose art is like in everything. If you saw their art, you would have, it from a dozen different books.
Yeah.
And they put up all their art as Creative Commons art, and they have thousands of pieces. So you can make a full professional-looking book full of their art. It's just that now everyone's used their art, so now it all looks the same as every other product.
But as a thing, those small creators still do that though. Like absolutely
all the time.
do that. It's better to have a thing out than to never have a thing out. Like no, even if that thing is not perfect, or if it's someone else's free art or whatever, make the thing and put it out. Mm-hmm. That's way more important than literally any other part of the process.
Just do the work.
Put it. Yeah. I don't care what it looks like or if it's like fucked up or whatever. Just make it and put it out. Like that's. Mm-hmm. Once you've done that one time, it will be 1,000 times easier to do it a second time. Yeah. And then one day it won't be even a thing you worry about.
Yeah.
The actual creation of the thing will no longer be a problem. You'll have all this other shit to deal with. And that stuff sucks. Honestly, maybe find a middle ground. But
find somebody to do all the shitty stuff for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the dream, but you got to do a lot of your own shitty stuff for a long time before you get to that point.
Yeah. I think that's it. I think that's all I've got.
Okay. I was going to ask you one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
And this was related to our IP-related games earlier. I had a thought that I wanted to... Do you find IP-related games still currently have a history of kind of playing it safe, mechanically speaking? I have not seen one. The furthest I think I've seen people do like experimental mechanics. I don't know. I don't see it all that often in IP related games. I feel like
it's very rare.
There are a couple of really good standouts in my head, but like most of them, I feel like do a kind of like D20 or D100.
Yeah.
Sort of like.
They go with the pretty baseline common stuff. I think the big standout in my head will always be Amber Diceless.
Yeah.
Because that was based on a book series, and it was probably the first big game to be a diceless game.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a fairly revolutionary thing in the history of the game, of the hobby.
I mean, diceless games aren't common, full stop, even like in the indie scene, right? Like
it's a rare thing. But there are a few. Yeah, the vast majority play it safe.
I wonder why that is, because it sort of implies that somebody somewhere like feels like they have a finger on the pulse of the tabletop RPG industry to the point where they know what quote unquote playing it safe is. Like tabletop RPGs is such a small industry, it's such a small group. It's like it's weird to imagine a world where someone's like, these are the systems that we know sell well.
Sure.
Right? Like these are the ones that we know function all that well. We'll use something like that as a baseline.
So
interesting.
Having every now and then a report comes out. They're usually thousands and thousands of dollars to buy, but there'll be industry survey reports that forecast what the future of the industry looks like. And if you're in the business, your company will probably buy one so that your marketing people or your strategy people can look through it. You can also get them if you have a good research library in your area. Often they will subscribe to them. If you go through those, you'll see that whenever someone's doing the kind of analysis that leads to this, they're only looking at like 10 companies. Because those are the only companies that are large enough to post any data that anyone can work with.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Do I think there is a place for strategists in the industry to work off of more qualitative data rather than quantitative data? Absolutely. And I think they'd arrive at very different conclusions if they did. But given the kind of qualitative or the quantitative focus. Yeah, I mean, if I'm looking at what sells, I'm looking at historically WotC, Paizo, FFG, Chaosium, Cubicle 7, and a handful of other companies. Um,
Which is kind of why all of those IP games look
they
like those games.
they all look like those games and they all play like those games.
Yeah.
Because
Or frequently they just go to one of those companies too.
yeah,
Like,
just be like, hey, do you want this? Do
yeah.
what you want, and what they have in their wheelhouse is that kind of thing already.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that is the reason more than anything. I would love to see smaller designers pick up small IPs and expand that. That
I
that
mean,
is
that's
kind of a
not.
dream.
Yeah, for sure. That would be so cool if
Like
that like.
approach somebody who does a pod or a webcomic or like a really small book that you love and nobody ever thinks about like adapting it to anything and just being like,
I
yo, I love your shit, can I do something creative with it?
I did
um
I did I did DM Robert Bennett, but he don't want to do it.
it's fair. All right, I am gonna hop off because all of a sudden I desperately have to use the restroom.
All
But
right, wonderful
this
chatting with
was
you.
a pleasure. I'm glad we finally got to do this.
Yeah, me
Um,
too. I had a
and
really good time. Thank you.
when the world opens up again, I hopefully see you at a con somewhere.
Yeah, I'd like that a lot.
All right. Well, be
Bye bye.
well. Keep doing cool
You too.
shit.